critical theory digital archive must ultimately be international in scope and attempt to forge relations with controlled access collections such as those at the Institut Mémoire de l'Édition Contemporaine in France, IMAC. IMAC is one of the most prestigious documentary source centers of contemporary French critical theory papers, including those of Louis Althusser, Roland Barthes, Émile Benveniste, Catherine Clément, Michel Deguy, Michel Foucault, Félix Guattari, Sarah Kaufman, Emmanuel Levinas, and Louis Morin. UC Irvine is uniquely positioned to lead an initiative for a critical theory digital archive because it can offer 3 case studies that represent a spectrum of the potential opportunities and challenges attendant to such a project. J. Hillis Miller fully supports the digitization of his papers, writes extensively on digital humanities and new media, and is on the editorial board of the Open Humanities Press. Paul Demond's scholarly legacy was put in question after his death when a graduate student doing archival research came across Demond's wartime journalism, igniting an academic wildfire that still smolders today. Lastly, Jacques Derrida's own archives at UCI and IMAC have been fraught with difficulties, not the least of which concern the technical reproduction of his papers. These 3 case studies represent a full spectrum of philosophical and practical issues that a critical theory digital archive could encounter. Prior to blueprinting a plan for the CTDA, the project must address critical theory's own discourse on the archive and technology in the public. The project seeks to tackle the difficulties attendant to developing a critical theory digital archive, from critical philosophical reservations voiced by some of the theorists themselves to digital archiving and intellectual property concerns. The philosophical foundations of the digital archive could be posited and deconstructed through a series of problematics that center on the deposited papers of 3 major critical theorists, Paul Demond, Jacques Derrida, and J. Hillis Miller, whose work has much to say about the conceptual nature of archives, dissemination, and emerging technologies. Immediately addressed will be such difficulties as Jacques Derrida's statements concerning the technical reproduction of his own scholarly materials housed at the University of California, Irvine, and the Institut Mémoire de l'Édition Contemporaine in France. Although Derrida's reservations about emerging digital technologies perhaps belongs to the particular circumstances of his own archives, these reservations may also represent a practical and theoretical resistance that confronts any digital archive. This prompts 3 questions. Number 1, trust, copyleft in the digital archive contract. Following the current collapse of the global capitalist contract, the issue of paperless digital monetary documents, and the struggles of the open access movement, what is the nature of trust, intellectual collaboration, and institutional anchoring in our era of digital promises? Key texts that might respond to this problematic would be Jacques Derrida's Politics of Friendship, J. Hillis Miller's Speech as Literature, Gary Hall's Digitizes book, and the University of California's guidebook, 7 Points to Understand About Copyright. Some might ask, what is the difference between privately circulating carbon copies, like the photocopies of unpublished Demond-type scripts passed around Yale in the 1980s and UCI in the 1990s within a scholarly inner circle, and exponentially proliferating digital mass dissemination, like the Critical Theory Digital Archive? The little circle tends to offer shelter from anxieties concerning trust and intellectual property, and promises to offer initiation into the delights of viewing hidden treasure, but perhaps ends up exacerbating neuroses and setting the stage for excommunications. The big circle no doubt offers false emancipations and digital deluge, but as Kant says about the without example experimentation of aesthetic judgment, one might just have to give it a try. Digitizing an archive, because it is a mode of technical reproduction and dissemination, is in effect a form of publication. As a philosophical act, this digitization puts into question the distinction between the book and the archive. When we turn to Derrida's prohibition concerning the technical reproduction of his archive, we see what is at stake: a prohibition against dissolution of the distinction between the book and the archive, a resistance to the reduction of archiving and publishing as a single technical procedure. In effect, a resistance to a shift in the distinction between published and unpublished, between the public and its other, which is perhaps not quite to be equated with the private. Publications other would instead be perhaps a mode of radical publicity. And we can never forget that since the term public comes from pubic, that which concerns maturation, adulthood, and more specifically manhood, what is at stake in Derrida's prohibition against the technical reproduction of his archive might concern jeopardy to a certain manhood itself, a fear of radical and endless dissemination. In addition, the digitizing of an archival manuscript lays bare for the reading the maturation of a published text, for instance, the excrescences and that which is excised. We should not be surprised if the maturation of the published text involves the relegation of certain inscriptions to the domus of the semi-private realm of the archive, of the paper archive. And we should not be further surprised if the undoing of the distinction between the book and the archive by way of digitization brings that which is relegated to the oikos into the fore. Recently, there's been a change to the duplication policy for the Jacques Derrida papers. Now duplication will be allowed, but one must request permission from either Peggy Camus or Geoffrey Bennington regarding their archival materials. So now it's an old-fashioned matter of permission. Techniques, number 2. Techniques of digital inscription. If our era of techniques tends to treat literary texts as mere information, yet the peculiar material of literary inscription resists universal abstraction, what impact does technical reproduction have on literary archives? Key texts that might respond to this question are Paul de Man's Resistance to Theory, J. Hillis Miller's The Medium is the Maker, Browning, Freud, Derrida, and the New Telepathic User Technologies, and Jean-Noël Jeanneney's Google and the Myth of Universal Knowledge.